The apartment next door had been quiet for hours. I liked it best when it was, still, soft, breathing through the cracks in the walls like a secret. Elias lived there. Tall, sun-browned, with careless laughter, and eyes that never quite settled on anything long enough to be read. He wasn't just my neighbor. He was a question I'd never been brave enough to ask out loud. We weren't friends, not in the way people use the word. We borrowed tools, carried each other's groceries, and talked too long in the hallway. He'd show up with beers after long days and say, "I figured you were bored." I'd pretend I was. He'd sit on my couch, barefoot, recounting work drama, or some story about his ex that didn't matter, and I'd laugh, sometimes too hard, sometimes not at all, because the space between us was always just a little too full. He never mentioned his sexuality, and I never asked. He talked about girls, sure, but sometimes he looked at me in a way that made silence stretch too far. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things. That day, the water steamed around me, soft and warm. I'd left the bathroom door open, not wide, just ajar, habit or something else, I don't know. The tiles were slick beneath my feet, the kind of quiet you fall into. I didn't hear the front door, didn't expect anyone. My breath fogged the mirror. The world was a blur of steam and thought. Then the door moved. Not a knock, not a shout. Just Elias, stepping in, pausing mid-motion as if the world had tilted and he wasn't sure if he was awake. I froze, water drumming against my back, my heart suddenly louder than the spray. His eyes found mine, not low, not searching, just locked there, long enough for the air to shift, for something unspeakable to stretch between us. He didn't speak. He didn't smile, just stared, stunned, and something else. Something I couldn't name. Then he blinked, stepped back, and the door closed. I stood there, trembling, not from cold, not from shame, but from the weight of what hadn't been said. He had seen me, not just naked, but as I was, without the armor of jokes or borrowed moments. And in that moment, he hadn't looked away. I finished my shower slowly, unsure if I was supposed to feel exposed or awakened. The apartment felt different when I emerged, like it had been cracked open, like the walls were holding their breath. I didn't know what it meant, only that he had stepped into my silence just once, and nothing felt the same after that. The next morning, I half expected a knock, a message, some attempt to explain what had happened. But there was only the quiet hum of the hallway and the dull creak of floorboards beyond the shared wall. I kept glancing at the door, absurdly aware of how little space separated our lives. He didn't come. When we did cross paths 3 days later, outside by the mailboxes, he looked at me like nothing had happened, said, "Morning," with that effortless shrug of his voice, handed me a letter misdelivered to his box, and went back upstairs without waiting for more. I stood frozen, fingers pressed against the envelope like it might carry some hidden message. It didn't. Still, something had shifted. Not loudly, but undeniably. He texted later that night. Just, "Beer?" And I said yes, even though I knew I should say no. He arrived wearing a hoodie, barefoot again, like he always was when he came over after long days. We didn't speak about the bathroom. He never even glanced in that direction. We talked about everything else. His job, the weather, some fight his friend was having with a girl. But there was something in the way he sat, the way his knee bounced restlessly, how he kept brushing his hand through his hair like he couldn't settle. One point he asked, "You ever feel like you're not where you're supposed to be, but you don't know where else to go?" His voice was quiet, not quite a whisper, but far from casual. I looked at him, waiting, hoping he'd say more. But he just reached for his drink and stared at the label like it might answer for him. I wanted to reach out, to close the space between us, and ask the questions that had been pulsing in my chest since the shower. But I didn't. Not because I was afraid, though maybe I was, but because I knew that once I did, nothing could be undone. The night ended like all the others. He said he was tired. I walked him to the door. His hand hovered near mine for a second too long, then fell away. He didn't look back when he left. I stood there, staring at the door long after it closed, the room humming with a silence too full to be ignored. Something was blooming between us, something wordless, confusing, and painfully delicate. And I knew, even then, that whatever this was wouldn't stay harmless for long. The knock at his door was different that day, sharper, purposeful. I heard her laugh before I even saw her. When Elias opened the door wide enough, her figure slid into view. Dark hair, high heels, a perfume that lingered in the hallway like something smug and unbothered. He said her name once, Sophie, and she giggled, pulling him in by the front of his shirt. The door shut behind them with a soft finality. I watched from my peephole far too long. The next few days felt hollow. He didn't text. The lights in his apartment stayed on later than usual. Laughter spilled through the walls like a ghost that didn't know it wasn't welcome. I told myself it was fine. I told myself we'd never been anything. That the moment in the bathroom, the beers, the lingering silences, they'd all been illusions born from longing. But the ache didn't listen to logic. It never does. When I finally saw him again, he was alone, carrying a bag of takeout, walking slower than usual, eyes downcast. I stepped out at the same time, pretending coincidence, and he gave me a small, tired smile. "You good?" I asked. He nodded, but too fast. "Yeah, just been busy." There was hesitation in the way he shifted his weight, like he had something to say but didn't know how to shape the words. I didn't push. I couldn't. That evening, I walked the long route home, letting the night wrap around me. I kept hearing his voice in my head, soft and uncertain. "You ever feel like you're not where you're supposed to be?" I knew he was. Drifting between two truths, the life he showed the world and the one that had started to flicker between us. And in that drift, I was the casualty. I was the secret. I was the thing he couldn't name out loud. The next time he came over, it was different. He didn't bring beer. He didn't sit. He stood just inside the doorway, rubbing his hands together, like he was cold. I waited. "I shouldn't have come in that day," he said quietly. "In the bathroom, I wasn't thinking." I swallowed the knot in my throat. "Okay." He looked up, eyes rimmed with something that might have been guilt or grief. I've never been... "It's fine," I cut in, sharper than I meant to. "You don't have to explain." But he did, didn't he? Not for me. For himself. For the part of him that had betrayed both of us by pretending nothing had changed. He stepped closer, hesitated, then pressed a brief kiss to my forehead. Not lips to lips. Just a whisper of skin on skin, like a promise he knew he wouldn't keep. And then he left again. But the damage had already been done. He didn't come back after that night. Not the next day. Not the next week. The hallway remained quiet, the soft thump of his footsteps replaced by silence so loud it pressed against my chest. I kept looking out the window at his balcony, expecting to see him watering plants that didn't need watering, making calls he didn't care about, just existing within reach. But Elias had vanished into his own life, retreating to the comfort of what was easy, what was expected. And I was left with the echo of a kiss that never belonged to me. I tried to move on. I buried myself in routine, filled my time with noise. But everything felt dull, as though color had drained from the corners of my world. It wasn't love, I told myself. It had been too brief for that, too uncertain. But the betrayal wasn't in how little time we had. It was in how much of me I had offered, how easily I let hope slip into the room when he did. One night, I heard voices through the wall again. Laughter, hers and his. A movie, maybe. Popcorn sounds. The low murmur of a shared life. I pressed my palm against the plaster, as if I could feel the shape of him through it. I wondered if he ever thought about me. If he remembered the shower, the night he almost said something true, or if I had already become a blur he was trying to forget. But it wasn't just silence he left behind. It was the realization that some people pass through us like comets. Brief, blinding, and always on their way to somewhere else. Weeks later, a package was mistakenly delivered to my door. His name on the label, scrawled in familiar handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before knocking. He opened the door slowly, like he hadn't expected to see me again. His eyes widened, then softened. "I think this is yours," I said, holding out the box. His fingers brushed mine when he took it. "Thanks." Neither of us moved. I studied his face, the same and yet different, tired maybe, or simply older from the weight of choices made. He didn't invite me in. I didn't ask to be. Just before I turned to leave, he said, "I never meant to hurt you." I nodded. "But you did." A silence passed between us, heavy and honest. He stepped back, and I walked away. That was the end. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet parting between two people who had nearly been something, had brushed too close to a truth one of them wasn't ready to carry. And in that almost, I learned the difference between wanting someone and being chosen. I was never his choice, but I had finally chosen myself.